You are listening to the North American Kings podcast, your traditional masculinity training ground. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, founder of North American Kings LLC, a leadership development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio. As we all know, the man brand has taken an absolute beating over the past few decades, and it's our mission to change that. We're going to do that by helping you join the fight to reclaim traditional masculine values. Welcome to headquarters. Training starts now. Welcome back to the training ground, folks. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. We've got a bit of a delicate subject to discuss today. While delicate, we're going to take great pains to discuss this topic objectively because it's wildly important for this audience to understand, regardless of your age. We're also going to be speaking to a guest who has some firsthand experience with the darker side of this subject matter. So before we jump in, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Naked Armor Razors and Wet Shave Gear. We've talked about setting the right example for the younger generations often on this show. A staple teaching experience that men have in particular is teaching boys how to shave. Teach your boys to appreciate quality. I wasn't aware that straight razors were even used domestically until just a few years ago, much less that they provide the smoothest shave out there. Naked Armor Razors is committed to being your wet shave gear supplier for generations, for you and the person you're teaching. Start that relationship off right by getting set up with a Naked Armor straight razor kit. Show the boys in your life that there's another level of shaving out there. Right now, my listeners can enjoy a 15% discount on anything in the Naked Armor online store by using coupon code KINGS15 at checkout. Don't wait to enjoy the highest quality shave you'll ever give yourself. Go to nakedarmorrazors.com. All right, so the topic of porn doesn't get talked about much. And when it does, it's often shut down. We're not going to ignore this topic because the negative effects are real. And they're being glossed over as if they're not, in fact, real dangers to men of all ages, particularly young men. I'm going to be as clinical about this as possible. There is a lot to unpack, and this subject is probably the most delicate that we've handled to date, even more so than the wage gap discussion that we had. We're going to thread the needle here in between the religious right, the misguided men who claim that sexual prowess is the pinnacle of manhood, and the actual facts. First, why am I bringing this up now? Now, truth be told, now's the perfect time, but it wasn't the one that I chose. The woke left did. Now, I'm going to be political here for just a moment because on this issue, there's generally a stark political divide. And because of that, I'm going to give you a political source. I'm doing that not to break the rules of objectivity that I've set up for this show. I'm doing it because I do not believe for 1 second that all of the facts will come out from a liberal-leaning news outlet. The facts of this matter a ton. Okay? Now, an article from The Blaze, Paul Sacca, Manhattan parents appalled at porn literacy class at elite $47,000 prep school teaching kids about kink and BDSM. That headline says a lot. Quote, parents and students at an elite $47,000 a year private school in New York are shocked and mortified about a porn literacy class that was added to the curriculum without their knowledge. The risque course for juniors at Manhattan's prestigious Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School introduced teens to adult-themed topics such as kink and BDSM. The article continues. Students aged between 16 and 18 attended a health and sexuality workshop, which most believed would be a sex ed class. Instead, the teens were educated on everything about porn. The course, which was officially titled Pornography Literacy and Intersectional Focus on Mainstream Porn, featured a list of the most searched porn terms in 2019. The article continues. The porn class was taught by Justine Ang Fonte, the director of health and wellness at another elite prep school, Dalton. Fonte's website boasts that she has reveled in disrupting health education for 10 years. The often explicit slide presentation and lecture by Fonte to the 120 boys and girls included lessons on how porn takes care of the 3 big male vulnerabilities, statistics on the orgasm gap showing straight women have far fewer orgasms with their partners than gay men or women, and photos of partially nude women, some in bondage, to analyze what is porn and what is art, according to the New York Post. One of the topics taught to the teen girls and boys in the course was the marketability of OnlyFans, which is the subscription app where adults sell nude and explicit images and videos of themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a ton to digest here. Now, I'll warn you guys right now, if it seems at some point during this episode that I seem to get fired up or even angry, it's because I am. This subject is something I'm rather passionate about because I've been spared the worst of the negative effects of porn, but I've experienced them enough to know that they are very real. Also, I think that the liberalization of the social culture has contributed to this information being buried in innuendo, social stigmatization, and veiled opinion. Hiding the real effects of porn has caused parents to be completely oblivious to the dangers of this vice, and they are unable to prepare their young men for this. I didn't become aware of the effects of pornography until I was at least 24 years old. And even then, not the real scope of some of the dangers that I was courting. This article should scare you as parents. If there are parents out there listening to this, you should be worried. The one thing that the pandemic has provided is a window into the public and now private education sectors. A teacher was quoted earlier this year advising other teachers to be careful. We don't necessarily want parents to know what we're teaching. This particular article proves that point. The article says that this may have been discovered by a parent who observed the situation on the Zoom classroom, but that isn't confirmed by the article. Parents are quoted as saying that they were not made aware of this before their kids attended this class. That's a scary thing. Where do schools get off teaching this type of thing to students, particularly without parental consent? They didn't bother even acknowledging what effects active pornography consumption can actually cause. It didn't matter to them. That's the problem. Teachers like this aren't concerned with it or even encourage our boys to fall into this spiral. We've discussed here multiple times that young men in school systems are secondary. This is just more proof. The school's response to this was far more telling, and it's more of the same garbage. Quote, Dr. William M. Donahue, the head of Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School, issued an email apologizing about the pornographic class at the elite prep school. Quote, the content and tone of the presentation did not represent our philosophy, which is to educate our students in a way that promote their personal development and overall health, as well as to express respect for them as individuals, Donahue said. It was unfortunate that we did not better inform ourselves of the speaker's specific content in advance, Donahue added. In this case, the speaker did not align with our unique CGPS mission, and for this, I apologize. Going forward, we will certainly learn from this experience. They're not apologetic about what happened. That's total and utter garbage. They're apologizing because they got caught and it made national news. And they spend more per year than probably than I did at a 4-year college. That's why that's why they're apologizing. That's why they're upset. We'll do better, sure. Parents, talk to your kids about what they learn in school. This parental involvement, it's been proven to heighten your child's engagement and performance at school. And you'll also foster a better relationship with them, and they're more likely to tell you about crap like this. Okay. This article is why I want to discuss porn on this program now. This situation was forced on some students. And I want to make sure that if this happens again, and given the times, I'm willing to bet that it will, if any of my listeners have children, or if my listeners are teenagers, and they find themselves in this situation, I want them to be prepared with more than just this dangerous disregard for their well-being. I want to give them real information and warning about this particular subject, because this will affects boys and girls, but this does affect men and young men in particular in ways that nobody's teaching and few people are talking about. Okay? Religious institutions have a lot to say about pornography. Unfortunately, there are some of the only outspoken people who will touch on this subject. Right? That's changed only slightly over the past year or so, and I'll touch on that in the interview coming up, but some of the religious slant on this I agree with, but some of it I don't. The reasons are varied, but the problem I mentioned before is particularly real here. Innuendo, social stigmatization, and veiled opinion. Religious institutions have a very real problem convincing secular kids, like I was, about these topics. You ever hear talk about sex objectively with like older women, like teachers or guidance counselors, or like a mother or an aunt, particularly the religious types? Half of the time that ever comes up, they can't even get the words out right. They're, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. Or they're so embarrassed that to even call things what they are, that they'll just, again, use little innuendos or little jokes. But because they're so embarrassed to talk about this, the problem is they might just even avoid the conversation altogether, which is worse. But is that person going to be able to teach you the dangers of pornography? No. And even if they got the words out, they wouldn't take them seriously. Would you take somebody who's giggling or not able to even say the words properly or correctly or seriously to you, like it's a real thing? Would you believe that person and take them seriously? The answer is a bold-faced no. So men, teenagers, whoever is listening to this, take this from a guy who has seen some of this up close and personal and who has spoken to people who it's actually harmed. All right? I'm not talking about looking at porn. Of course I have, but I'm talking about the dangers, the ill effects. I've seen them in person. I am not scared at all to talk to you about this. The only innuendo you're going to get from me on this particular point is because I'm on terrestrial radio and there's some things that I cannot say. Okay? But let's set the stage here. I want you to know exactly the frame of mind that I'm occupying. This is the one that I'm hoping to pull you into. Okay? Some of you may disagree with these stances. I don't care. Okay? Pornography is bad for a few reasons. We're going to focus on the mental and physiological side effects. There are bad effects that particularly affect women. We're going to skip some of these for both time and relevance reasons. All right? This is a show for prepping up men. Women, you have plenty of resources out there. Okay? And I feel for you. You're going to get some good things here too, but for time and relevance, we're going to hit the things that most affect women, affect men, and how they interact a little bit. Number two, I actually encourage masturbation in moderation. Okay. And I will get to the specifics of that later on in the episode, but I am drawing a very distinct line between pornography consumption and the actual pleasuring yourself part of your life experience. Okay. Third view, viewing porn, masturbation, or looking at women's bodies is not wrong. And moreover, it's not cheating on any woman that you might be dating. Okay, so this is not adultery. All right, I'm not going to touch whether or not it's sin or any of that other stuff. All right, this doesn't make you a bad person. All right, what I'm talking about specifically are the mental and physiological side effects that do get experienced by viewing pornography. Okay? This does not make you a bad person. Again, for those religious folks who might take issue with this, because I know it does contradict some of the biblical philosophies, I'm sorry. The advice that I'm going to give is the most practical advice that anyone will give you. The religious view isn't secret to anyone. And if someone is listening to this and is convinced here that porn should be taken more seriously than it is, and they decide to go the extra step and take the religious position on their own, great. That's not the point that I'm trying to drive in. I'm trying to give people practical advice about this, not stoked in innuendo, veiled opinions, and dogma. Okay, that's my promise to you as the listeners. So let's start with an article from Psychology Today by Dr. David Luden, titled "The Truth About Men and Pornography." The very first sentence: "The pious and pompous preach that the perils of pornography from pulpit to podium." I'm sorry, let me repeat that again. "The pious and pompous preach the perils of pornography from pulpit to podium." Now let's stop right here real quick. This is where the religious institutions lose most people. And it's because they tell you that porn is wrong, right? Few go into what makes it wrong. They tell you, they'll discuss, and the why that they'll discuss is because God said so. And there will be, there'll be a few verses that make sense, in the right frame of mind. Unfortunately, few people are in the right state of mind to discuss this openly. So to start by God says it's wrong is doomed to failure. And there are a couple of specific passages in religious texts that you can look at. But if you're not there when they're having this conversation, it's doomed to failure. And this happened, it was for me. I laughed at a pastor's face when he brought this up to me when I was like 12 or 13 years old. It did not start me in the right spot. Now, from this article, in a study of 300 men, 97% had viewed pornography at some time in their lives, 94% had viewed pornography within the last 6 months, and 82% self-reported as regular viewers of pornography. Now, those numbers pass the smell test. Okay? More from the article. The average frequency of porn viewing was 3 to 4 times per week, with an average quote-unquote session lasting 15 to 30 minutes. The average age of first porn use was 13, and most have become regular porn users by 16 or 17 years. Again, this passes the smell test. Okay? Now, again, I will make the distinction one more time. We're talking viewing and using pornography, not just your in the shower masturbation or whatever you're into. Okay? I'm going to make that distinction this time and maybe once or twice more because there's a big difference. Okay? Now, findings from the study. 1, men who have never been regular porn users assessed pornography as having more negative effects than positive. 2, men were Men who were more religious reported more negative than positive effects of pornography. However, they didn't report a lower frequency of porn use than the non-religious men. So even in the article, they're acknowledging that this might be just due to a sense of guilt. Fair. Number 3, although both younger and older men reported an overall positive experience, younger men also indicated a greater degree of negative effects than did the older men. Now, overall, this article gave us some numbers, but it didn't tell us the effects. Don't worry, I've got you. This article from fightthenewdrug.org titled 5 Ways Porn Can Harm Your Brain, Body, and Quality of Life by J.K. Emezi, an addiction recovery professional. Now, I'm only going to hit the top 3 because there are better examples and sources that I have here of number 4 and 5, but here we go. So number 1, the effects, how porn harms your brain, body, and quality of life. Number 1, porn encourages self-gratification by hindering our development of delayed gratification as a life skill. Now, the article goes into some detail, but we know that we want instant gratification. And we've noticed that with the rise of social media, smartphones, and the internet. Now, being patient, having some prudence, having, again, patience is a virtue itself, but as we want instant gratification, it's affecting our lives in very negative ways. And porn encourages this I get my fix immediately mentality, which is a burden and a detriment to our society. Number 2, porn destroys our values. Ha ha. Because pornography programs us to lower our standards sexually. It encourages us to seek sex and, in some cases, build intimate and unhealthy relationships with people who are willing to have sex without any boundaries. Now, we're going to touch on values in a bit, but this also speaks to some of the objectification of women and men that porn generates. It also speaks to, hey, look, we're valuing our bodies, we're valuing ourselves less as sex becomes this pastime rather than an intimate act. That's why a lot of people, including some people I will mention in this in the later part of this episode, we're going to find that people who have very healthy relationships waited longer and longer. And people who are often more satisfied by waiting and pursuing intimate relationships emotionally before they do it physically. An example from pop culture of porn destroying values. I'm not sure if anybody remembers Friends. I hope that the younger generation will find this on Netflix or wherever you can find it these days. But there's an episode like midway through the series where Joey and Chandler are living in Monica's apartment, and for some reason their cable messes up and they get the porn channels for free. Now it's on a loop all week, and they make this running joke of this throughout the whole episode. Now, the only time they realize that this might be a problem was, again, of course, near the end of the episode, where Chandler has the realization, claiming that it was really weird that the girl dropping off pizza didn't offer to let him pay some other way. So to be clear, we're hinting at the problems of porn in this. And they realized, again, hinting at it, that having porn on all the time was probably a problem for them. Right? Now back to the article. Problem number 3. Porn can cause erectile dysfunction. Oh my God, shocker. For those teenagers who don't know what these two words mean together, it means that you'll have difficulty becoming aroused enough to even have sex. Soldier won't stand at attention. I mean, however you want to describe it. Now, frequently watching porn can lead to erections, which can increasingly only be induced by hardcore pornography. That's not healthy. All right. Now, porn consumption then becomes this sort of psychological conditioning, which creates performance anxiety. Okay. So now it's going to take more stimulus to get you going, and it's going to take more stimulus to keep you going. And when you can't perform because you're in a physical situation with a loved one, now all of a sudden you're going to fail at that, which is crazy emasculating. And I've told you guys before, emasculation should be avoided at all cost. Okay, now I'm going to cut to an excerpt from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, published by the U.S. National Library of Medicine National Institutes of Health. This by Alexandra Diana Duelit and Piotr Zimsky. And I apologize for butchering those Russian names. Some studies reported that long-term use of pornography correlates with erectile dysfunction, decreased libido, higher interest in pornography rather than sexual contacts with real partners, and lower sexual and relationship satisfaction. So not only could you not be able to get it up, but we're also risking a decreased desire to even engage in sexual encounters. Now we're also risking becoming addicted to the actual material and the possibility that we'd prefer porn to actual relationships with another person. And finally, we're risking lower sexual and interpersonal satisfaction with the relationships that we currently are in. Does any of this sound like a bargain? There's something lost in here. Pornography can be addictive. Yes, and I mean yes, addictive. That blurb about becoming more interested in porn than in actual sex with another person, that blurb was real. That's real. That happens, and that is extremely dangerous for us and for you. No one talks about porn in that way, or in the same way that people do when they describe drugs or addiction. It's the same stuff. The more that you consume, the more you need. And I mean you need it. And actually, you can actually experience withdrawal if you don't actually take in your particular vice. Now, according to the NCBI piece that we discussed in just a minute ago, 72.2% of those attempting to quit pornography use indicated the experience of at least one associated effect, and the most frequently observed included erotic dreams at 53.5%, irritability at 26.4%, attention disturbance at 26%, and a sense of loneliness at 22.2% of those trying to quit. Furthermore, longer stimulation and more sexual stimuli needed to reach an orgasm when using pornography was reported by 12 to 17.6%. That's female to male subjects, respectively. Now, we're told as kids that we'll go blind or our palms will grow hairy if we participate and if we pleasure ourselves too much. If our parents would have known these things, they may have led with actual information rather than jokes. Right now, also, the paper was able to see a statistical correlation between the age and weight of the subjects tested. The younger or bigger that you were, so people who are a little heftier like myself, right, these negative effects affect these people more. And moreover, the negative effects were felt much more prevalently by people who were single, as in not in an actual relationship while the tests were actually being taken. Now, I'll never forget this conversation I experienced when I was 18 years old. I was riding the school bus for one reason or another. I can't remember. It was either car trouble or something. I forget. I wasn't a frequent taker of the bus, but I knew some of the people on it. So this particular experience could only have come through fate, right? I was such an infrequent traveler on this that the fact that I saw this conversation, participated lightly, and even remember it is mind-boggling. But two sophomores that rode the bus were dating. All right, no big deal. I knew them both lightly. Somehow, I overhear one of the frequent riders, who I knew more than most people, sort of making fun of this kid. And I leaned in to listen, and I see that it's this decent-looking kid that, again, I knew very vaguely. He was like a golf league type guy. I'm wearing this polo, but by no means am I like a golf leaguer. But this guy, he was a nice kid. What he was being made fun of will haunt me forever. Okay? Now let me set the stage. His girlfriend was an absolute bombshell. I'm talking like jailbait, 16-year-old girl for all the 18-year-old seniors. She was absolutely gorgeous. Turns out she's becoming frustrated with him because he doesn't want to engage sexually with her. Now, when has that ever happened in high school? The girl, a 16-year-old hottie, is effectively pestering her boyfriend for sex. And he's a 16-year-old boy. Like, I've never heard of that. I couldn't believe it. That's when I interjected to clarify, and I leaned in and asked her, I'm like, you mean to say he doesn't want to have sex with you? Like, I couldn't believe it. And she nodded, resigned to the fact, like this wasn't the first time she's fielded that particular question. And I remember looking over at him, and I'm like, dude, why? And his answer will never leave me. He said at 16, I want to wait until I'm married. I could not believe it. Now, that answer itself isn't a novelty. I want to wait until marriage. I've never heard it from a guy, or at least up until that point. The reason this will haunt me is because of the situation this guy was in. I feel physical pain, or at least I did, thinking of how this kid resisted temptation every single day. I hope he made it. Like, this kid is the reason I believe wholeheartedly, now he's not the reason, but he's a reason. I believe wholeheartedly that masturbation, while in moderation, is a healthy thing. Now, I've been in several situations where I've been tempted by women who were less than reputable, right? A little dirty, a little crazy. Sometimes those are the most difficult opportunities to avoid. There's taboo in that. Wrong feels good. That's why they call it temptation, right? Now, masturbation in these situations can be a necessary relief and a release of that pressure. It can help you focus. It can help you get past sexual tension and bring things into perspective. For this kid to be tortured by I don't know if she was badgering him, but I can only imagine if a girl that beautiful wanted to be intimate with me at 16, I wouldn't have lasted a day, much less the rest of this guy's existence or the rest of that relationship. If she was that frustrated then, waiting until marriage from 16 until whenever they potentially got married was probably not going to happen, unfortunately. But I can tell you, I've been in situations where I've been so attracted to a woman that the only way to get rid of the distraction was to take care of the situation myself. It was astonishing to realize how little I cared after the deed was done, further proving to me that, like, personally, that that has benefits. Now, that's a very difficult experience. That's a very different experience than using pornography to relieve sexual tension. Like, even going to a strip club doesn't cause the same issues that porn does in regular use. At least at a strip club, again, you have to show up and then you have to leave. All right? Porn is always there, and that is part of the problem. Now, the last point points that can be made about pornography is that it decreases the satisfaction that people have in their real relationships. This affects both men and women. Think back to the gentleman, and I will call him that I was just describing, the 16-year-old like man of iron will. The reason he's waiting for marriage is because marriage provides an intimate bond between two people, and in waiting to explore sexuality with someone that you're bonded for life with is a very good and healthy thing to do. Sex, according to Dennis Prager, one of the best political philosopher and religious philosophers that I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to in person, has said that the basic needs aren't just food, shelter, and water. It's also sex. It's a biological human need. And he's even said masturbation, as long as it doesn't interfere with your interpersonal relationships, is perfectly fine too. This is from a very religious person. Now, the reason I mention this is because in listening to some of that philosophy, waiting until you're married can bring about some of the most intimate, emotional bonds that people can experience by using sex as a tool for that. Now, women derive more sexual pleasure from relationships that are meaningful. Men do too, but women are more affected by this. Now, in an article from Medical News Today, several doctors collaborated and found that women and men both derive heightened senses of sexual satisfaction from subjects who were in healthy, long-term relationships. Satisfaction more than doubled over a 40-year period from the ages of 26 to 66 with regards to length of the relationship. I had to explain this to a friend of mine not like a year ago. He was experiencing, quote unquote, some neglect from his partner. He was actually pretty angry about it. Now, my thought at the beginning of this coaching gave him some pause. I said, "What did you do to make her want to do that stuff with you?" And he was a little confused, so I repeated myself with a little bit more clarity. It's your job to make her so turned on that she wants to do these things with you. Did you do that? Now, he said, he always performs extremely well. So what did turning her on have to do with it? And then I had to explain what I had just outlined to you folks. Women derive sexual satisfaction from the relationship as much as the act. If your relationship is broken, she cannot feel 100% satisfied, no matter how attractive you are. If she feels, let's call it a 30% gap in the relationship, but you're like 100% hot to her, like she's completely physically attracted to you, she's never going to be more than 70% into the experience. Those numbers get worse as the situation does. I'm not 100% attractive, all right? So instead of a gap of 30 in the relationship, let's say I'm 70% attractive, right? Well, she's only going to feel, a maximum of 40% into the situation at best. Now, porn does nothing to help this. If the relationship is faulty and either party start valuing porn over physical intimacy with the partner, there will be consequences. Back to the performance anxiety mentioned before, that's not healthy in a relationship. Right? That emasculation, that feeling that you cannot engage with your partner in an intimate way, that grates on you. Now, if men start seeing women in general, or even their woman, as just objects, they'll end up devaluing the relationship. And if women do this to themselves, they'll have exponentially more intimacy issues going forward. They mentioned OnlyFans as a point during the pornography literacy class mentioned in the Blaze article. It used to be that women needed to move to like Vegas or LA to become a porn star and subject herself to that lifestyle. Now, with this OnlyFans program, these women are choosing to subject themselves to the objectification of an entire industry. all from the comfort of their own home. Now, it might be lucrative and it might be more free of STIs and drugs, but it's still debasing and risky. And again, at least at a strip club where women choose to be there, men need to arrive and need to leave. Things that end up on the internet never go away. So today, ladies and gentlemen, I've told you that we're going to speak with someone who's got some personal experience with maybe the darker side of this pornography issue. I think most guys at some point will have gone through some of this, but today I've got on a personal friend. We'll call him Trucker Mike, and we're going to talk to him about some of his experience and some of the ramifications that porn has had on him. We'll talk about how porn has had some effects on me, and we'll give you guys some perspective here from real people. So, Mike, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm blessed to share what little knowledge I have, but I think it's important for this kind of topic to, not everybody gets to hear the darker side. A lot of people have some experience and they escape it. Other people don't. And I've got 2 decades that I want to talk about.
Fair. And actually, I mean, that's a really interesting point that you make right away, is that we don't really talk about that or this. Actually, the only time I've ever heard it really in public recently was Terry Crews, the ex-NFL player and the actor. Yep. Just publicly came out like he had a porn addiction, and I think that's the only time anybody's really started talking about it outside of some of the more risque things that we're hearing about in schools, or you or me having personal conversations. So I'm glad we're talking about it. Mike, I guess, do you want to just kind of tell your story a little bit, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah. Well, since I'm making my internet debut, I'll give a little introduction. I'm currently a reserve major in the Marine Corps, getting out relatively soon. Beautiful family that I'm lucky to still have. Very blessed to have been able to graduate from the Naval Academy. And that's enough for now. I'm sure there will be other opportunities to get more in depth, but that'll be enough for the moment.
So when did you first have what was your first experience with porn? I guess that's the question everybody wants to know. Like, hey, who were you talking about? A guy who discovered this in his 20s, or?
Right. It would either be from my public library around the age of 12 or 13, or when my parents got our first home computer. This would have been mid-90s, and the internet was taking over the world. And I was aware of porn, but nobody had experienced internet porn yet, and I got a rude introduction. My parents obviously didn't want me looking at it, and so they took various steps to try to prevent me from gaining access, but this was a brand new thing. I learned not to get caught with deleting browser history and deleting cookies and various things to make it look like I wasn't looking at what I was looking at. Parents got wise to that, but clever kids find clever ways to do what they think are clever things that are really just stupid. And that was, from 12 to 13, that's when its claws got hooked into me.
Gotcha. I'll be honest with you. My experience was actually probably about that same age too. And I remember finding someone's stash, and that was before even we had the internet.
Right.
And again, I guess the reason I'm saying this for the audience, if you think you're keeping it secret, kids will probably find it.
Right.
And that was my first introduction, and down that hole you go, right?
Yep.
So how did this affect you going forward? I know everybody that I've talked to has had any sort of issue with porn, or who's ever experienced any of the effects. They've experienced it at some point. When did you start experiencing any of that, or did you just decide to quit?
Well, I would say that from the very beginning, I immediately became an insular person. this, I don't think anybody thinks of pornography as a virtue. I think it's almost universally considered to be a vice. And
Yep.
I grew up in a non-denominational Christian home where such a thing was looked down on, and you can't do anything but hide this kind of behavior in that kind of a house. So that's the kind of person I became. You look for ways to find opportunities to look at what you want to look at. What that means in practice is you isolate yourself from everyone that loves you or that you love. That was my experience. The long and short of it, if we're going to make a really long story short, is that at the 2 decades later, I have no personal contacts from elementary school, middle school, high school, college, a decade in the military, coworkers. I talk to no one, and no one talks to me. That's the end result. During my formative years, scientists will tell you when the majority of the brain is forming and when it stops forming, or not forming, excuse me, but growing and learning, and really mid-20s is about when it stops. And that entire time frame, teenage years to young adult, pornography was the thing that I wanted. And because I wanted that, I didn't really care if my personal relationships with other people were abnormal or substandard or non-existent. I didn't care. And it's a huge regret of my life that people that I grew up with from elementary school through high school that I considered to be my friends, I was obviously wrong. I obviously, just due to the amount of contact that we have as evidence for what kind of friendship we had, I got married and nobody came to my wedding. I didn't think anything of it because I was in the military at the time. There was only a small period of time for me to have the wedding in the middle of flight school. And so if people couldn't come, people have their reasons.
Yeah.
But looking back, my dad was my best man. Now, I'm glad for it, but to an outsider looking in, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's like you don't have a best friend. Well, no, not really. That's the result of of just a life avoiding the hard work of developing and keeping relationships with people. Porn is way easier than that. And it's immediately gratifying, but not in a good way.
Right.
That's
and
been my experience.
Well, and there's a lot out there that, again, we can tell you, you and I can talk politics or education or kids development. Like, we need them to develop some patience. So I guess, one of the things that they are noticing is that, we're not developing that delayed gratification, like life skill.
Right. Exactly.
Which is a big thing. But I got a question. So did you ever talk to your parents about like porn? Or did anybody, like, what was your, I know adults talk to us, like good, bad, or like however they did it. Did they ever talk to you about it? Like, what was that like, if you remember?
What I remember was the chase. And what I mean by that is, I remember the first time I got caught looking at porn on the computer because I didn't know what cookies were. Well, then I learned. And then I didn't get caught with the cookies again. And then there was browser history. Okay, well, there are ways to get around getting caught with browser history. And getting caught was the primary interaction that I remember having. And so even though I knew it was wrong, like there was nothing about my family that would lead me to believe that what I was doing was okay. There was every indication from everyone I knew, including my parents, that I shouldn't be doing what I was doing. But I didn't care. And so to have a, say, let's say a birds and the bees kind of discussion, but with the focus being, here's what pornography is, here's why it's bad. It's obvious why it's bad, or at least I thought it was I thought I knew that it was obviously bad at the time, and my parents probably didn't think that they needed to explain to me why it was bad. They probably thought that it was self-evidently bad. And so a really in-depth, detailed, come to Jesus, so to speak, conversation never really happened. It was more, what you did was wrong. Here's the punishment. Don't do it again. And I kept doing it again.
Well, my experience was very different. I know, like, every time it was brought up, it was almost brought up in like a joking or not taking it quite as seriously. Again, that self-evidence, was almost
right.
That should have explained it, right? Like, hey, porn's bad. Why? God said so. Well, to a kid who's got some urges like that, that's it feels weak, right? Especially if they're, I don't want to say relatively secular, but
right, yeah.
Also I think like I didn't have anybody that really talked to me about it. Like, what are the dangers, and I'm not, maybe they didn't even know, but no one really talks about like erectile dysfunction or, the dissatisfaction that you end up seeing with your physical or even personal relationships as a result of this, all that stuff. It feels like they dance around it. Even when confronting the issue or an issue around it.
All I can say about the scale of the problem back when it started with me was my litmus test, so to speak, was, Playboy, Penthouse magazine, that kind of stuff. That's relatively easy to keep a child away from. If you don't buy it, if you don't hang around people that have it in their homes, the likelihood that they'll get it is relatively low, unless they have, that one bad friend that is a bad influence that every mother wants to keep their beautiful baby away from. But the internet was new when I got into this whole thing. And the scale of what was available and the scale of what my parents needed to hide me from, again, so to speak, they just were not equipped. They just didn't know how bad it was, or maybe not even was, but how bad it was becoming. For that generation that only had to hide Playboys from their children, the internet's just completely different. It's just a different animal. And again, I don't want the audience to think anything bad about my parents. They did the best that they thought they could do. I know that they tried to keep this stuff away from me and from its negative influence, but I was determined to get what I wanted. So
fair. Now, how did you break yourself from that? The $1 million question, right?
Right. Let's see. Divorce being talked about for probably the 10th time. Now that's a rough introduction to just how bad it can be. What happened with me specifically, I got caught one more time. That one more time where I had promised not to and still got caught. But in this particular case, and I'm going to get a little bit biblical, if
by
the
all
audience
means.
doesn't mind.
Yeah, by all means.
The Matthew 23:23 is what God put on my heart. And in that verse, Jesus Christ says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness." And I had been a Christian my whole life, but at the same time I had been a Christian my whole life, I was doing this porn stuff, which immediately this verse had me pegged as the hypocrite. I was obviously neglecting the weightier issues that the Bible puts forth that are in God's law. And well, in this particular case, God blessed me because having realized what I was doing, that I was that hypocrite, that I was neglecting this issue, I went to my wife and told her this specific verse that God had put it on my heart. And this specific chapter, Matthew 23, was what my wife had been studying. And she didn't know why she had been studying it. It's just something that God had laid on her heart too. And she took that as a sign that she should give me one more chance. And it's been better ever since. So
great. And I love your wife too, by the way. So like, I'm glad that it happened.
Right.
But I'll be honest with you. How I started my road to recovery a little bit when I kind of broke myself a little bit. Yep. And the reason I say that, like, not like I was broken or had something wrong, but I was thinking about another subject, like what would make me cheat on my wife. And I forget why I was thinking about that, but I was thinking very seriously about not like I was going to, but someone had asked me like what would make that a reality? Like what would make you cheat? And I got to thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? It's not sex. Because I mean personally, and this kind of took the sex out of porn for me.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, well, let's be honest. Like, I'm a decent performer, but is sex with like a porn star or sex with movie star, whoever you got a crush on, is that going to be that much more valuable, or is that going to be that much more pleasurable than sex with your wife? And at the end of the day, like, it might be a little bit. But for your average Joe who's not like practicing at home, like, or, who's got like books and books and books or whatever. And I was thinking like, it can't be that much better. And that kind of took the stigma of, the stranger or that promiscuity part of it out of that. And of course, I value my relationship with my wife. I've said on the show 1,000 times. I've told you, like, no one gets me the way Kelly does at all. Like, no one's going to catch up to her, right? With all the quirkiness and all the, like, hell, like doing this show. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no, I don't think anybody could really catch up to her in that way. And then I got to thinking, well, if no one's going to catch up to me catch up that way, and it's just sex, now it's better with my wife. It's a sexual experience. Like it builds our relationship, but thinking about it like very objectively, like that kind of broke that stigma. And then I was able to kind of take myself away from it.
Right. The fantasy it doesn't have any appeal.
Yeah. Like the fantasy's gone. Right. I'd rather swing a sword and play Dungeons and Dragons or do something like that than I gotta bleep that out, but then go take care of business.
Right.
So yeah. I guess again, and I'm saying that for our more secular viewers, that there's that way to go about it as well. Right. But one thing that I did read now, for those who can see me on the screen here, I've got a version here of the Men's Bible from the National Coalition of Ministries to Men. And this particular Bible has several references inside it for those who do want to look through the Bible to find particular like male guided issues. And one of the things that was mentioned, and I forget what the reference was right off the top of my head here, but one of the references was that we need to replace our lust or replace that urge with something. Now, this particular this particular author, or not the author of the book, but the author or the person who put that side note in there, there were several ministers that did so, said that, replace that lust, that urge for connection with God. Now, I'm not saying to go do that with God, and I'm not saying not to. I'm saying it does pay, in my experience, to replace that urge with something. And I think that's kind of what people forget, and that's what causes some guys to maybe backslide on that addiction a little bit, is that, if they don't replace it with something, then there's just going to be that long wait until they are, remembering their passwords or going in and trying to kind of that chase that you mentioned, trying to go back to that old crutch.
Right. For me, it was video games. I remember even as a kid, the original Nintendo, loved it, wanted to spend all my time doing it or playing it, and porn kind of took the place as the number one thing. But video games was a very close number two. When porn was rearing its ugly head and I wanted to get away from it, video games was one way that I tried to get away from it. Mixed results, because even as a dad with a career, kids, wife, I'd be up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning trying to chase the porn desire away with video games. Well, you can only do that so many nights in a row without crashing at work and being completely unproductive.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to knock on video games too much, but
and I wouldn't either. I mean, I love video games, but kids and stuff like that. I know I know one of the things that they say, especially I remember from the old DARE programs, when you're fighting addiction, or the kids that stay busy are the ones that don't end up engaging. They're either too busy, they're too engaged with something else. There's not a void that they're trying to fill with the addiction.
Right. Yep.
And I think to that point, we're trying to fill it with something, and if we don't, then back we go.
Right.
I know one of the main things that they continue to tell us is to confide in people. Right? They're the way to really cut yourself off from that. They do sell software that will filter all pornographic material from your computer, from your search histories, and the best way to go about that is to give that access to a person that's not you. Because I've even tried that myself before, where I had a friend called in a favor and said, "Hey, change all my passwords to something." Well, right. and no questions asked, and bro just changed it. But eventually, it maybe took like a month, but eventually I was looking for my own password. I forgot password. What are your secret questions? And off the wagon you fall. But there is software out there that you can buy, and I'm saying this more for my viewers than you, Mike. But
no.
But
and I can speak to that as well. Net Nanny was a specific software that I used to varying success, but I would say that throughout my ordeal, if I can call it that, the risk of getting caught was never a deterrent to change my behavior. The risk of getting caught was a deterrent to getting caught. Now that may seem obvious, but
no, I like that.
For people that use software, it's just software, and it's only as good as the programming that it's only as good as its programming. So for things that need passwords can be overcome. I will only speak to the fact that no software that I ever used caused me to have a change of heart. It never changed my desire for the behavior. It may have limited my opportunity to engage it, And you always hope that, if you're simply not given the opportunity to do something, well, just not having the opportunity to do something means you're not doing it. But that doesn't eliminate the desire to want to do it. It doesn't change the heart. It doesn't change the urge to go on the hunt. And sometimes the hunt is actually what you want, not the prey, so to speak. I don't want to be a downer on software per se, or in general. For a lot of people, it definitely does work. But for me, hardcore user, hardcore deceitful in all my ways, trying to get away with what I wanted to do whenever I wanted, that did not work for me. It really came down to my wife being the godly example in my home, and me wanting to follow her example and realizing that I was a complete hypocrite and that I would never be able to be the leader of my own home unless I changed.
Well, I think that speaks directly to our audience, us trying to build better men, to build kings out of the princes that we're trying to be right now.
Yeah.
Trying to be the leader of the household, trying to not need those crutches, trying to set the example for the kids before that are coming after us.
Yeah.
So Mike, thank you very much for your time today. Ladies and gentlemen, Trucker Mike, a good friend of the show, a good friend to me personally. Mike, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks for having me on. I hope it helps.
That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. I know it was a touchy subject, but I hope that we outline some of the very practical and real risks of something that is presented as not risky at all to those who partake. Again, porn is vice. I'm not saying everybody's free of vice, but vice needs to be taken very seriously and entertained in a knowledgeable way. And I hope this program did that for you today. One quick announcement: this program has been airing once per week, and we've been extremely glad to be able to continue to produce programming that will fill that demand. But for those of us involved, there's only so much time that we've got available. Now, we're going to be cutting this show to once every other week, so twice a month. On the off weeks, expect videos and other material to come out of this exercise or this business. We're not going to be using that time to just sit at home. We're going to be producing workshops for boys and teenagers, and we're going to use that time to do some community outreach in person rather than, behind this camera. So if anyone is interested, please email us at podcast@NorthAmericanKings.com, and we can set you up as a mentor or a volunteer to help out as you guys want to see fit. The website is being revamped a bit to accommodate some of the new functions that we plan on serving, so please expect that to be back up shortly. If you like this episode, please leave us a 5-star review and follow and subscribe for free. We're on Apple Podcasts, Rumble, YouTube, and wherever else you get your content. Also, please tell your friends to listen and subscribe. Good luck out there.